recorded. The slideshow will be made, the slides and the recording will be made available to you all following the webinar, and you'll receive instructions via email on how to access such. I just want to, all right, make sure. Just a quick kind of toolkit in case you have questions during the webinar. There will be points in which we are going to stop to take questions. So if you look to the right of your screen, there's kind of a toolbox that you can type in questions and send to us, and we'll be checking that periodically throughout the webinar to try to address as many as possible. And if we can't address them all on the webinar, we will make sure we try to follow up with you as soon as possible. So the National Foster Care and Alumni Policy Council is a council that's brought to you in partnership with Foster Care Alumni of America Foster Club, where I serve as the policy director. And generous support is provided by KC Family Programs. So thank you to all of our partners. So on the call today, you have myself. My name is George Collins White. I'm the policy specialist with Foster Club, as I mentioned earlier. I purposely decided to leave my photo off because our main presenters today are Jessica Harris, Cody Bogman, and Tamisha Macklin, who are all members of the Policy Council. And we're very thankful for them being here and dedicating their time to share their knowledge with you all today. So just a quick rundown of today's webinar. We'll have kind of a brief overview of what the Policy Council does, what they do, who they are. In this webinar, as kind of you all may have gathered from the email invitation you received, we'll talk about one of their specific priority areas that is related to preventing homelessness among young adults who exit foster care. We'll look at two kind of programs that are doing some very cool and unique things to prevent homelessness and address the needs of young people exiting foster care. And then we'll have a wrap up. So the total webinar will be about an hour long. So to get started, it's really important to make sure we kind of let you, the audience, know what the Policy Council does and who they are. So as noted here on the screen, the Policy Council has a few different kind of key things they do. Using their experiences in foster care, they work to identify priority areas to offer ideas to improve child welfare systems. And so that's done through kind of a scope of having individual meetings with each other. They get together about once between 1 and 3 times a year. And then they do polls that we'll talk about a little bit later on in the webinar to really make sure they're understanding what young people across the country are saying. And so they take these this knowledge that they've gained through their meetings and polls and surveys of other young people, and they take these priorities and work to educate policymakers and other child welfare professionals, whether that be at the federal levels or state level, and sometimes even the local level. And they really look at a lot of programs that are happening and talk about ways we can make them more effective and make sure they're really serving the needs of foster youth. They provide a collective viewpoint, and I think that's one of the key things I like about what the council does is oftentimes it's really easy to look at our personal circumstances, our personal situations, and say, well, I didn't experience that, or this is what I experienced. The council really makes sure it's kind of helping elevate the voices of a mass amount of people across the country, kind of breaking geographic barriers, not just trying to connect with the folks in the urban cities, but also with folks in rural areas as well. And so the first person I'm going to kick it off to is Jessica.
Hello, once again. My name is Jessica Harris. I'm from Maine. And on your screen, you have the list of priorities that we have worked on and we have elevated, giving our feedback on aging out, so youth aging out of the foster care system. Crossover youth, which are youth that fall in that crack between the juvenile justice system and the foster care system. Homelessness, which is about what we're doing today. Mental health, like mental health services or mental health in general and the supports they can have. Normalcy, which is the having a normalized experience while in the foster care system. Some youth get very stringent activities that would not be expected or considered normal by the public, and we're trying to improve them having a normalized childhood as much as possible. Vulnerability is about youth being sexually exploited and feeling very vulnerable in that sense. And well-being was having them have some social and mental well-being. Next slide. Currently, we are working on two priorities. The first priority is social capital, and social capital is trying to improve the amount of relationships that foster youth can have, relationships they can rely on, relationships that they can develop and become lifelong connections beyond their foster care experience. And then the second one is preventing entry into foster care, so making support for those families before they become so critical that they have to go into foster care. So providing supports to the parents, maybe some counseling. We're just really working on trying to make it so less kids are going into the system.
And I will point out here at the bottom of the screen is a link that will have, whenever we have new priorities that the council is working on that are in development, we will list them on the website. So right now there is one survey that is open, and within the next week or so, we anticipate another survey being open as well. So if you want to jot down this link, it's going to be sent out in the follow-up email that's sent as well.
All right, so drafting our priorities. How we kind of develop our priorities, by first, we like to narrow the focus of the priority. We take a broad idea such as like sex trafficking and break it down to like reducing the vulnerability of youth in foster care. Then we research, review. We gather information on policy priorities from leading advocacy groups. Then we use that to help us understand what is trending, but we also allows us to see any gaps that the advocates might be missing. Next, we survey constituents. This allows us to the group to dig more deeply into the topic. It allows us to test theories that members have about the topic. The community or the committee members are heavily involved in developing these survey questions. Then we analyze the survey responses. Staff generally begins looking for trends and any unique information that the survey seems to be telling. Then the members of the board also have access to that data as well. Next, members begin to brainstorm of the priorities. We try to address the challenges that we identified through the survey. Then we narrow that down as well. The council has recognized that our best recommendations have been foster specific and relevant. Then we create our first draft of our priorities. We use research and use quotes to back up our priorities. We found through our experiences, we have a very diverse experiences, all of us. So using that can also give us a little bit of credibility. We also have members and Casey and partners review those priorities as well. Lastly, we begin our final draft and we vote to adopt that in an in-person meeting. The next slide.
So how the council defines homelessness is an unaccompanied minor or adult without access to consistent housing, which includes living in shelters in the cars, on the street, vacant buildings, or couch surfing. This is the definition that we provided on our survey. And the reason why we provided this particular definition, and especially the couch surfing portion, is because federally, couch surfing is not recognized as a form of homelessness. And we wanted to capture that as an option that appears in homelessness. Many youth couch surf, they jump from home to home, and it's not necessarily a place that they can go back to every night. And we just wanted to make sure that those people were included in our data. Next slide.
So some of those findings, the council polled 108 alumni in the foster care system. 67% of those polled said that they experienced homeless by the age of 19. Some of the leading causes of homelessness were lack of familiar support, lack of job opportunities for employment, the expensive housing costs, unrealistic income requirements, such as needing to provide a credit history or having high upfront costs, having to pay first and last month's rent right away, and then just the harsh economic realities that young people are living in and facing. Next slide, please. So homelessness leads to the increased likelihood of youth going hungry, being unemployed for long periods of time, suffering from depression and anxiety. There's also a huge issue around drug and alcohol abuse. Some youth have domestic violence, and also criminal records. There's a lot of young people that get in trouble for like trespassing or stealing things because they're in survival mode. So the next slide, it captures the top 5 states that represent approximately 34% of the nation's foster care system. And so it just kind of puts everything into perspective, just showing that the income needed to have a livable wage so that you can rent an apartment does not match the minimum wage that young people are starting off in these lower level jobs if they don't have their degrees. And those are some of the things, the barriers that they have.
And I'm just going to add again that this data is pulled from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. So their website is nlihc.org. And if you want to kind of see updated numbers or your specific jurisdiction, you can go online to see that for yourself as well.
So our priority to prevent homelessness, we, after completing our survey through the group, found that we became very evident 4 primary areas of service and supports that can help lead to prevention of homelessness following foster care. And these were the 4: affordable long-term housing, employment, early planning, and emergency support. Next slide. Affordable long-term housing or long-term housing, 60% of those that were surveyed that experienced homelessness stated they did not know how to apply for public housing. Some of the waiting lists I know in Iowa are 3 to 4 months even out to be able to get housing, even if they were to apply. I know when I even turned 19, I barely knew how to sign up for a dentist appointment, so let alone a housing application that has a bunch of information on there that can be very difficult for a lot of youth. Next slide.
And I think, again, I think one of the things that it's important to point out as well, sorry, just going to jump in, Cody, are some of the things that the council really talked about that they believe would really help young people not have to experience homelessness. So I think, one thing that we'll talk about is, flexibility and time frame for using housing vouchers. So at the time this was written, there was, there's the family unification program, housing vouchers were limited to 18 months. That was expanded since then. We'll talk about that a little bit down the road. But the council also talked about supporting young people until they're age 26. So that didn't mean necessarily. Sorry. That didn't necessarily mean housing until age 26, but the support to kind of get that housing resources they need, whether it be through independent living skills or through kind of employment, all the things that would lead to housing, helping provide services that would kind of make sure they're having stable housing.
So employment education opportunities. The survey also found that young people in foster care had limited access to workforce developing. In many foster care or in many foster and group home kind of prevent the youth from working. So this lack of experiences means that the foster youth are already behind the curve when they turn 18. They're not getting the chances to fill out an application, how to do a resume and so forth. So if they're not taught those essential things, it can already put them behind everybody else that would have those normal experiences.
I think I think one of the really important things to also underscore when it comes to employment is that your first job is usually always the one that leads to your second job, right? Once you get that first job, the second one comes much easier. Again, what showed up in this section as well was increased independent living skills. Also, another thing that's become really evident in the work that the council is doing, but also kind of more broadly, is kind of education and vocational skills. There appears to be a disconnect between what post-secondary education means. So there are a lot of feelings that people, that kind of caseworkers and other supportive folks aren't as supportive of kind of vocational options. And so then they don't provide those necessarily as options for young people. And young people aren't always wanting to go to a four-year institution. And that becomes especially true when you're homeless, because when you're homeless, as we mentioned before, some of the things you're worried about is what you're going to eat for dinner, not, do I have a midterm tomorrow? So understanding that, if I can get into some vocational training and get some hard skills and, get a job, then maybe once I, have satisfied my kind of immediate needs, then I could start thinking about education kind of in a kind of traditional four-year institution sense. But the request is that folks are more supportive of vocational options and trade schools, whether it be health professions or other trades.
So early planning, saving, financial stability. What we've kind of gathered was that we want people to be able to teach us how to save money in order to be financially stable when exiting care. We need to know how to budget, what deposits are. Simple things that we know now. When we're turning 18, we're not necessarily prepared for. Before exiting, we need help with to know what counts as income, what we can put in there. Sometimes when you're applying for an apartment, you need to show that with the stipends and so forth, that you can be able to afford to live there. There should be a tool that kind of helps reflect the unique diversity of income that foster youth may have, such as student aid, independent living dollars, employment, IDA dollars, extended foster care payment, those kinds of things, so that we can have proof that we can be able to afford to live in some of these apartments, because some of that we're not necessarily sure what we can use when we're applying for an apartment.
So,
next is emergency support. Something that really rang with me was we need safe housing, not just a roof. So the idea of, just because we have a roof over our head doesn't mean that it's always the best place. And allow us to make mistakes without jumping straight to moving us out, losing that housing right away. we all run into in our daily lives. We all make mistakes, but sometimes we're quick to jump to conclusions on why that might be. And then we also need access to financial assistance for emergencies until age 26. As George was kind of talking about earlier, is that, that extended help until 26 can really help youth get stable. I know a lot of my college buddies who, when they got out of college, they moved back home. Not all foster care youth have that same option.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cody. Um, All right. So I think, yeah, we didn't include a slide. I think I'm just going to take a quick check for questions before we make a transition. And I think there was someone that did clarify. Yes, the McKinney-Vento does identify couch surfing as homeless. So thank you for that clarification. Let me make sure. I'm just making a quick note. So someone wanted to know kind of about flexibility and time frame for using housing vouchers, and so they wanted to know what did they mean by that. So what the young people had recognized is that very often housing vouchers in a lot of states were limited to usually like 12 to 18 months, which is can usually no time at all. Right? When we think of when we move into a new apartment as adults, it usually takes us a month to get all our boxes unpacked. So if you're telling a young person, all right, now I got your roof, now you've got 18 months to get all your life in order and get employed and be able to afford housing on your own, it's unrealistic, right? Because if we look at the cost of housing, even if I get my first job while I'm in, using a housing voucher, it's still, the job probably isn't going to be paying enough to afford to pay rent on my own. So one of the things the council really wanted was expansion of time and kind of flexibility with understanding the needs of the population and not just this is the priority, so this is what we stick to. So moving forward, we're going to kind of highlight a couple of programs. We're going to talk a little bit about the Family Unification Program, and then kind of look at some programs in Colorado and Maine as well.
Okay, so the Family Unification Program is a housing program for youth and families that come from the child welfare system. It has it's a collaboration between housing authorities and child welfare agencies across the United States. It has expanded as of January 1st. It expanded to 36 months, and this came from the response of hearing the needs of young people in foster care. And actually, last February, some of the policy council members were actually able to have a sit-down meeting with HUD to kind of express some of our concerns and present our homeless priorities. So this voucher is for youth that, in order for a young person to qualify, they would have had to have left the foster care at the age of 16 or older, or they will be exiting within 90 days. And so it's in accordance with a transition plan described in Section 4755H of the Social Security Act. And they have to be homeless or at risk of homelessness in order to qualify. And so the 3-year expansion for young people is definitely more realistic, so that they have that opportunity to get on their feet, maybe finish post-secondary education to help them increase their income as part of it. So the next program that I'm going to talk about is here in Colorado. It's called the Pathways to Success program, and I'm actually one of the Pathways navigators. It's a partnership with the state and the county human services departments. We're piloting this in 5 counties. So it's a combination of rural counties and the urban communities as well. So each participant will have a Pathways navigator that will help them during their transition into independent living. This program started in 2006, and there's 5 pathways that we focus on. So housing, education, health, well-being, employment, and connections. We really emphasize on prevention, being trauma-informed, youth-driven, and strength-based. And so overall, what we seek to do is empower youth to advocate for what they need. Since the program has started, youth are really excited to be a part of the program, and we are able to work collaboratively with community partners to provide resources for youth that are at risk or actually experiencing homelessness. So yeah, that's it.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
So in Maine, we have something called the Alumni Transitional Grant Program. This actually is a relatively new group. It became live in January of 2015, and it was proposed in Maine legislature in February of 2014. I myself was in the entire process of making this from when it was first introduced, and I sit as the co-chair on the advisory council now. The group itself helps any foster youth that ages out of our extended care agreement at 21, and they can access the program until their 27th birthday as long as they're doing some form of education, whether it's college, tech school, certification, as long as it is doing some betterment after high school. This is what this program really is for. This program primarily helps with finances, helping look at what they make as an income and supplementing that. So if their living expenses are pretty high and their college expenses are really high, the program will really try to fill in that hole so there's less of a chance for homelessness, providing rental assistance, connecting them with lots of resources with that navigator position that we have, and making sure that youth have someone to talk to ask life skill questions like, how do I get my car registered and stuff like that. And we even provide emergency assistance, like if your car breaks down, there might be some funds to help with that, or connections on who to go to help with those kinds of funds. So we just wanted to give a big financial and service help to those youth in that age range, because that is the age where youth are still going to college, but the services tend to start slowing down or stopping completely. Next slide. Next slide.
There's no other slide, Jessica. That's the last one.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Jessica, Cody, and Tamisha. So I think we've talked a lot about the priorities for the council, and specifically like this program here. What I think is really fascinating and important is that it serves young people up to age 27. And that's really significant, right? Because the research is telling us that most young people aren't leaving home until they're 26 years old on average. And so seeing that there's programs out there saying, okay, well, we know that you're kind of going to be having a difficult time as you start to go to college. So what can we do to support you through that? And college does not necessarily mean, I always tell this to people, college does not mean four-year university. College is that which happens after high school. So we talked about trade school, community college, things like that. And so I really enjoy these programs because they really kind of hit the nail on the head with addressing those needs, right? emergency financial assistance, because not everyone has parents available, especially folks who experience foster care, to go to ask for help in an emergency. Um, and so looking at that, although this is a relatively small program, looking at those types of programs are extremely helpful. So moving forward, kind of the obvious question is, what next? What do you do? What do we do? So I think, if you're working with youth groups, if you're a child welfare professional, looking at ways in which you can incorporate this. One of the biggest things that we talked about was access to housing, right? Not just cost, but the access. So specifically, like with the family unification program, that is the partnership, that's not available in all 50 states. And even in the states in which it operates, it's not available in every jurisdiction. There are only about 300 sites nationwide, including Puerto Rico, Guam, and other territories. So thinking about, all right, well, what is there, like looking at advocacy work at our local levels to say, hey, how can we work with our local housing agencies and child welfare agencies to see if there are ways to expand these programs in our jurisdictions. And when we talk about independent living programs, working with our child welfare agencies to make sure that our independent living programs are addressing the needs of young people and are being adapted accordingly. Not many young people are writing checks anymore. That's a big one, right? Like teaching how to write a check might not be as important as it used to be. So making sure we're adapting those things. And there are, and the federal government is listening, right? There are a bunch of bills that were proposed that will do a lot of these things, but until those things happen, we have to think about what we're doing at the local level. And so, working with your local child welfare agencies to take these priorities that, and I will make sure that you all get kind of a hard copy of this. They are available on our, or not a hard copy, an electronic copy in your emails, but they're available on the National Policy Council's website, which is at nationalpolicycouncil.org. But take them to your youth groups, take them to your local child welfare agencies, and really work through these, kind of look at the resources that each of your jurisdictions have, and find ways in which you can even incorporate the smallest things. If I drop out of school as a young person, maybe kicking me out of my housing program is not the best option, right? Evaluating what extended foster care looks like in each of our states and local jurisdiction to make sure that we're meeting the needs of young people always. So with that, kind of move forward with questions. I'm going to see if I can try to parse through some of these questions here. So again, I think, I've answered. Some folks want to know which states. I will send a list of the most up-to-date kind of list of jurisdictions that are working with the family unification program. But it's also important to remember those aren't the only options, right? Transitional housing programs are still extremely important and extremely crucial. And a lot of the time, the very first kind of place that young people will look is for transitional housing programs. So although, family unification programs are important, they're just one piece of the pie. Other transition support programs are important as well. And so someone asked, are the programs we're talking about for kids in foster care? Yeah, so all the things that the council works on are issues related to child welfare and foster care specifically. It doesn't kind of disregard the needs of other populations, but kind of when the council is working, they're working on the specific needs of young people who have experienced foster care. Let's see. So maybe Jessica and Tamisha, the question is, how are the programs in Colorado and Maine financed? Jessica, do you know how the transitional grant program is financed in Maine?
Yes. So I was actually there during the whole process of this being created. We had to ask our main legislature to make this a program. So it's a policy, and it's funded through our main state government as a grant. I think we get on average about $5,000 per slot. 40 slots we have a year to fill. And I think it's times the semester. So we get a good sum of money. This was actually our second attempt to create a program like this. Our first attempt was trying to expand our aftercare agreement, but the fiscal note was so high, we had to revisit it and make it this grant program with only 40 slots. But it is funded through our main state government.
Awesome. What about, thank you so much, Jessica. And what about the programs in which you referenced in Colorado, Tamisha? Do you know how those programs are financed?
Yeah, the Pathways program is a 3-year grant program, and so it's a grant that we applied for, and I believe.
No pressure. It's all right.
Yeah, I'm not sure who the actual funder, but I know that it's the Pathways to Success grant, so that's what it's called.
Awesome.
It's a pilot program. Mm-hmm.
I think both of those show that a lot of these programs we can't only look to the feds to solve them. Sometimes we have to find creative ways in our state budgets and through private foundations and other kind of sources to solve some of these problems. Let me see. So I think that seems to be about the final question that I see here in the chat box. Let's see. So someone wants to know about kind of like the level of advocacy, grassroots level in states and community. We with the council being a national program, I think it's a very, very unique kind of population of members because there are 20 members who are doing work, like Jessica, Cody, and Tamisha at the state level, at their local level with their local councils and their local youth groups. So although, we do these surveys, a lot of the things happen at the local level. There's a lot that could be done at the federal level, but most of the advocacy that's happening is at the local level with folks that are members of the council. And then members of the councils they're on back in their home states and in their counties and cities. And so I guess there was a question about the transitional grant program about satisfactory standards in school. I believe, Jessica, you said they have to be meeting at least a 2.0 standard, right? Which is the C average. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And also, if a youth is struggling with academics, sometimes we will, if they're in that probationary period, that will give them a chance to get out of that probationary phase, maybe try to see if we can provide additional supports to help them so they can get out of academic probation and be able to maintain the group. We're pretty flexible right now with that and making sure our youth succeed. We don't want the fear of not doing well in education causing them homelessness. So we really try to give them, I think we've been doing it where I know that one of the navigators that we work with gives like a semester to bring the grades back up to at least that 2.0 standard. And then if it's a tech school, we just monitor to see how they're doing in class, if they're going to class and all that stuff. And we get documentation just to provide clarification because we want our kids to be able to not only finish school, but finish school well.
Awesome. Let's see. A bunch more questions came in. Some were very technical about receiving credit for attending. You'll receive an email about that specifically that shows how to kind of make sure we have your information to send that along. Um, that I'm trying to just, and just a clarification, Tamisha, the Pathways program is through kind of local private foundation grants, right? Or is it a federal grant that the program applied for?
It's a federal grant that
Oh,
we applied, that the program applied for.
awesome. Sorry, just give me, I'm trying to make sure I cover most of the questions here. Um, so I think that seems to be most of the questions that we have the ability to answer here on the call. One of the final questions is about the bills proposed to address the needs of independent living programs for youth. So there are some bills that are going to go to the House floor soon. We will kind of make sure we send out emails to our network, kind of talking about what those bills are moving forward. So we'll definitely make sure you all get an email with that information also. Um, well, um, and just so you all have it, here is my contact information, George at fosterclub.com. If you would like to send me an email, you can easily send one there. I will, try to make sure I get back to you as soon as possible. Um, Otherwise, I will make sure I get you all the slides, the recording, and all the follow-up things that we talked about on our webinar. So once again, thank you all for participating with us today. A very special thank you to Cody, Jessica, and Tamisha, who took the time out of their day to help facilitate this webinar. You all have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.